my first guest I'm super excited about. He's a staff writer with the American Prospect. His name's Alexander Salmon. Alexander, how are you?
We're doing great. Thanks so much for having me on.
Good, yes. Well, I had you on personally to talk about this article that you wrote about campaign finance and fundraising specifically when it comes to the Democratic primaries. It's such a good piece, and you basically go over 3 different lanes of fundraisers. You talk about the traditionalists, the super rich, and the reformers. And I just wanted you to just go over those with us by starting with the traditionalists. Who is raising money in this election under sort of the traditional ways that we know candidates to raise money?
Absolutely. So the traditionalists have kind of struck the kind of centrist ideological stance in this race. So that's Joe Biden, it's Pete Buttigieg, it's Amy Klobuchar, but it's also been some of the shooting stars that have already burned out. So Kamala Harris, Julian Castro,
sweet way to phrase
it, and Cory Booker. So they've kind of done what Democratic politicians have done for time immemorial, which is they've done high dollar fundraising events. They've pressed the flesh with the super rich and coastal enclaves in San Francisco, on Wall Street, you name it. They've benefited from super PACs, and they've used those kind of mechanisms to put together a pretty substantial financial backing to fund them in the race.
Right, and yet it's actually not working, as you just said. There are some stars that have burnt out thus far, and those traditionalists aren't raising the kind of money that we're seeing from the reformists. These are folks who are earning or getting their money through small dollar donations. They've sworn off super PACs and big dollar fundraisers. Who are these reformists and how much money are they making? I think obviously we all know who they are, but just lay that out for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren obviously are the two who kind of represent this new approach to fundraising. And obviously Sanders had a pretty substantial grassroots army in 2016. So I think that we've kind of gotten used to it in some way, and it seems maybe less spectacular. But what he's doing in this race and what Elizabeth Warren is also doing is something that's never been tried in presidential politics at this level. And what they're doing is basically funding their campaigns entirely on small dollar donations. And that's something that's never been done. I mean, Sanders obviously, even in 16, had a lot of small dollar donations, but he too did some of these paid events. He did some fundraisers. And so it's a big leap of faith. And to this point, it's been rewarded, incredibly. And obviously Sanders is kind of set the high water mark again and again on these fundraising records. But, at the end of Q4, he had almost $35 million, which was obviously record setting at that point. And then in January, he turned around and brought in $25 million in 1 month.
Wow.
And, and they're startling numbers. They're extremely large, and it's very impressive. And that's not to say that Warren's numbers haven't been impressive also. It's just, Sanders are even larger. So the two of them have taken a big risk in doing this, and they've kind of gone without the corporate sponsorship or the big money sponsorship that, has been part of the process forever, and so far it's paid dividends in a major way.
And how are they stacking up against those traditionalists like Klobuchar, Buttigieg, Biden? It seems like they're raising more money than them.
Right, and that's what's so interesting about it is, especially take Pete Buttigieg, for example. He on the stump has argued that embracing these big money fundraisers is actually kind of an actively populist social good, and he's not going to turn away money from anyone who wants to help beat Trump. And that's even more extreme than we've seen from Democratic politicians in the past, even corporate Democrats. And despite that incredibly fulsome embrace of big money forces, Buttigieg's biggest quarter was $25 million, and Bernie blew him out of the water by $10 million in the fourth quarter of 2019. So it's interesting. It seems as though there actually is less money in the traditional approach all of a sudden, which is a paradigm shift that I'm not sure any of us would have anticipated going into this election. And the candidates who have hitched their wagon to the kind of large money bundlers, Joe Biden is the same way,
right,
have not put up those big fundraising numbers that actually the small dollar candidates have been able to mount.
Yeah, and I was curious about the point you made in your article that actually it's harder to fundraise those big dollar donors. And why is that?
It's an interesting glitch in the process here, which is that those high dollar fundraisers, rich people who cut big checks, they require a lot of attention, and they like to be they need to be waited on hand and foot. And they need to have their egos massaged, as the case may be. So, it takes a lot of time to raise money like that. And in the case of the kind of most ignominious moment of fundraising so far, I think in this cycle was Pete Buttigieg in the wine cave. Well, he spent hours at this wine cave having dinner, cracking jokes, uncorking his most charming one-liners and assuring his investors, as they call them, that that things are going to be fine, and he's the horse they should bet on. Well, one of the attendees, after this whole thing became a major national story, took to the Washington Post to defend the sanctity of this event. And part of what he used to defend it was that he had already given Buttigieg upwards of $2,000 and could only give $11 more before he was maxed out legally. So right. Buttigieg, spent hours attending to this guy, and I'm sure many others. But for $11, the return on investment there is not going to blow away any of his former coworkers at McKinsey. So it's an interesting problem where it's Sanders and Warren, because they can send an email and say, we need money, we're working for you, and the money comes in. They don't have to spend so much time pressing the flesh, and it actually ends up being a more effective fundraising mechanism finally. Right,
because they can be out there and actually talking with voters, as you were saying, doing campaign events and such. Let's talk about obviously the last lane of fundraising, which is the super rich, the self-funded candidates like Tom Steyer and Michael Bloomberg, the billionaires, which I thought was fairly unprecedented, and I'm wondering if I'm wrong. Have we seen this kind of pay to play before?
You're absolutely right insofar as we've never seen it at this scale, and certainly never seen it at this level of competition. So someone like Ross Perot was a self-funded billionaire, right? And he ran for the presidency in 1992. In 1996, as a libertarian, he succeeded basically in ensuring that Bill Clinton won both times. So there have been self-funders at various levels of government. It's mostly it almost always has resulted in defeat. But we've never seen anyone like Michael Bloomberg before, and that I think is a point worth mentioning. And you're right to identify the amount of money, the sheer financial force that Bloomberg brings into this race is unlike anything we've ever seen. Right. And interestingly enough, it's Tom Steyer. If Bloomberg wasn't running, Steyer might be, something we've never seen before in terms of just how much money he has behind him in his self-funded race. So it's a byproduct of this moment of acute inequality, and it is historically unprecedented.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like progressives have railed against dark money for so long, and we wished it away, and now we've gotten something far worse. It's like we cut out the middleman, and now we're just left with a billionaire. And it's you as you point out in your article. And what if Jeff Bezos tomorrow decides to run for office? I mean, he's got many more billions of dollars than Bloomberg does. But at the same time, we're in a moment where you're saying we either have these small donor-funded candidates or billionaires. What do you feel like that says about the political moment we're in?
It's an interesting referendum on this moment. So I think it's been 10 years since Citizens United, the Supreme Court decision, was codified as law, and money has never been more involved in politics. I mean, seeping through every pore of the political process at this point, and so we've kind of reached this interesting breaking point where we can either go one way with this surprisingly democratizing small dollar approach that is something 10 years ago we would not have even thought was possible, which right. Is a positive development, or we can go the other way, which is this this massively financially endowed self-funded billionaire who's going to basically buy not just the apparatus needed to run a campaign, but the votes essentially to win one. And it's certainly an inflection point for us in our democracy. And I think if Sanders is able to pull this out with just small dollar donations, I think that we'll see something like campaign finance reform will be possible. Whereas, if we end up with Trump versus Bloomberg as the ultimate billionaire versus billionaire slobber knocker, in a multi-billion-dollar election, I'm not sure what that portends for our democracy, but it's certainly nothing in the realm of campaign finance reform.
That's really interesting that you say that. You feel like that if Sanders can prove that he doesn't need those big donations, actually that's more of a case for campaign finance. I would think that if Bloomberg is the nominee, that would be a huge case for campaign finance reform. But of course, I don't know. That would also make us all sort of throw up our hands and be like, well, I guess you need, $60 billion to run for president. So just lastly, can it be done? Can can Democrats actually defeat Republicans if they're not playing their same money game?
That's the question. That's exactly the right question to ask. Just based on my research and what I did for this piece, I think there's reason to be optimistic. And I don't want to say for sure that it's certainly going to work, but just the sheer number of donations that the Sanders campaign has brought in, and honestly the engagement that Democrats have gotten at all over the ticket using small dollar donations, so up and down the ballot, in House races like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or Katie Porter, Elizabeth Warren in the House or in the Senate rather in her previous runs, there is a lot of there's an emerging set of evidence here that says that this may be possible. And the Sanders campaign said, they think that they could raise $1 billion off of this. And I've seen no reason to think that's not true. So it's certainly a leap of faith. I think that there, against all odds, is actually a real case here to say that this could work. And it will make Democrats better legislators. It'll make them better politicians because they won't be beholden to his interests. And I think it may be a winning combination, which is something, a silver lining in what's largely been a fairly dark news cycle when we talk about the presidential politics.
Absolutely. We are at a funding crossroads. Thank you so much, Alexander Salmon, for joining me. Staff writer at the American Prospect. Check out his article there. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much.
2 easy ways to follow the Young Turks. One is hit the subscribe button down below. Then you're a TYT subscriber. And second is ring the bell. And when you do that on YouTube, you're notified of our videos.